Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Long and Winding Royal Road, a special episode. I've gone on a long and winding road from my home, where I normally record this show, to the what do we call this place? Chateau de Fucked Up.
I guess the house that MP3's built.
There you go. So I'm in the home of noted punk rocker Damian Abraham, the host of his own podcast, Turn Out a Punk.
Yes.
Media celebrity. Did a show for Vice called The Wrestlers. Great show, by the way.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. I mean that honestly.
And he was kind enough to say, WH, for the last show of 2022, why don't you come to my house and we'll talk about kind of not the 90s of All Japan, but the 80s of All Japan, because we're going to talk about somebody Damian has met in person, who started off in All Japan in the 80s and then became a bigger figure in the 90s somewhere else. But we'll talk about him in a second. But Damian, thank you so much for inviting me over here.
It's an honor to have you here because I've been a fan of you for a long time. Speaking, continue on the long and winding road. I think, yourself talking about Japanese pro wrestling, kind of bringing it into, because at the time, like now it's a different world we live in where there's a lot more sort of accessibility to Japanese wrestling product for people in North America, in the English speaking world. But at the time it was still pretty underground. And I had friends that traded tapes, so I kind of was familiar with it, but it was like you and your former broadcasting partner kind of contextualizing a lot of stuff, hearing that, and the work of Bahu, FMW, and Bahu's work kind of preserving that stuff, and Mouth doing those FMW DVDs.
Yes.
That was like, this is what got me into this stuff. So it's an honor to be here. I feel like, being a fan of the show, I'm one of the least knowledgeable guests you will ever have on here, but I do have personal experience that relates to the topic.
That's the most important thing, but it's okay. You don't have to be a huge fan of 90s All Japan to be on this show. I've had tons of guests who aren't necessarily super fans of it, but like I like introducing it to people. But we're not going to talk about 90s All Japan. Maybe the next time you're on the show.
Oh, I would love to, because I think
we'll watch a movie. We'll watch a match from that era.
Yeah, and I think that's like, that's like, to put into music terms, which is obviously where I spend most of my time. That to me is like, like that is the Stooges or the Black Flag, like just canonical, the best wrestling of all time. And I think if you are a wrestling fan, you watch that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm very much familiar with it, not nearly as familiar as some of the guests who have been on. I feel weird if I'm following directly after Tom Lawler, which is going to be big shoes to fill, but
he can't punk rock out like you can.
No, and so. I actually, when I met him in person, the thing we bonded over was John and Way. I went up to him and I said, "Hello, I'm a friend of John and Way's," and that was my in.
That's going to be my in person. Besides, like having done a podcast with Tom. But we're here. This is our last episode of 2022, and I wanted Damian on this show to talk about a match from the 80s. We're going to talk actually about someone who's not really associated with All Japan necessarily. He's more associated with a company called Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, FMW. As you can see, this t-shirt signed by the person we're going to talk about. His name is Atsushi Onita. But he started off in the All Japan dojo. He was actually considered really the true first graduate of that dojo. Not Masawa. The Masawa debuted earlier. Sorry. Jumbo debuted earlier. He's like a peer of Jumbo Tsuruta and Jinichiro Tenryu. But Jumbo trained with the Funks in Emerald, Texas. Onita actually trained in the All Japan dojo with like the guys like Baba and all the other guys training people in that dojo. So he's from that system. It's interesting. We're going to talk about like his career trajectory from being a junior heavyweight in All Japan Pro Wrestling. Then he retires for a little while, and then he goes to create FMW, and really modern deathmatch wrestling is attributed to him.
I think modern wrestling in a lot of ways could be attributed to him too. Like just in the presentation of it, like obviously the modern deathmatch stuff, which has become very mainstream at this point. But I think you look at the influence he would have on ECW and kind of the cross-pollination that would go on there. And I think it is pivotal to like where wrestling is now. And I think that's the thing about him that I love, is that he's constantly reinventing himself. Like he was elected to the Japanese Diet for a while, and then he had to leave because he had a threesome with a porn star, and I think it was like the receptionist for the Minister of Transportation or something. And it's in his office, and he's this guy who he's like a less evil Ric Flair in a lot of ways, in the sense that he is like, he's just always there and always finds a way. Jeff Jarrett-esque in some ways too. Like he's always going to be, and he's just got that charisma. Anyway, I don't mean to...
but you know who else got elected was the great Sasuke with a mask on, without using his real name. So it doesn't really say too much about the Japanese diet, to be honest with you. Antonio Inoki got in, and he was like riddled with just as many scandals as, maybe more than Onita, to be honest with you. So anyways, getting elected to the Japanese diet isn't really an accomplishment. It's kind of easy, really, if you think about it. But anyways,
I will though say though, you know, if you're going to get elected to something like that, you have to get kicked out spectacularly. And I think it's hard to overcome that.
No, hey, if I was gonna get kicked out of, like, you know, anything like post wrestling, sure, maybe those circumstances would be my way of going out.
Threesome in the post wrestling.
Well, we won't say anything more than that. Like, Wade's gonna be like, oh, I gotta edit that out or something like that. Anyways, we shall move on. So in the 80s, so this is gonna be really interesting to talk about him in the 80s, because he was the cornerstone of a fledgling junior heavyweight division in All Japan, which was more known for, like, you know, heavyweight wrestling, but because New Japan really took off with, like, guys like Tatsumi Fujinami, Dynamite Kid, Tiger Mask, and they really popularized New Japan's junior heavyweight division, which was like gaining popularity throughout wrestling in Japan. Bob was like, okay, well, I got to do something. Unfortunately, he did not have like the kind of talents that New Japan did, but he had a good crop of guys who were in that weight range, including Onita, including Masanobu Fuchi, who Onita and Fuchi were kind of really tied together as a tag team for a long time. They did excursion in Memphis, I believe. They're part of the concession brawl.
Yeah, they were there for the second concession, two-blow concession brawl. And I think they also wrestled in Puerto Rico for a while, which led to Terry Funk. It led to Onita having to stay at Terry Funk's house because he refused to, I guess, let another guy go over him in the way that they wanted him to. And so they beat the shit out of him backstage. And when he was recuperating, he went to Terry Funk's house for a while. And that's where he said he really became familiar with barbed wire, because he would have to do the barbed wire, putting it up every day on the fences around the farm.
The Double Cross Ranch?
Yeah.
Wow. What a career. This man has worked as a farmhand on the Double Cross Ranch, among his many other, like, achievements and accolades in the world of wrestling.
He's in a Godzilla movie, right?
Onita?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, he's in one when he retired from wrestling and he went into acting. He did one of the Godzilla films.
I did not know that. These things we learned about Atsushi Onita here on this episode. But today, we're going to talk about Onita as a junior heavyweight. We're going to talk about his match he has in 1983 on April 20th at the Tokyo Metropolitan Gymnasium as part of the All Japan Grand Champion Carnival Tour. This is day 25. The attendance is listed on this as 11,000 on Cage Match. So I'll maybe work. I don't know.
It looked packed.
It looked packed. It was very, very lively crowd too.
That's what I thought too. I thought this was a really loud crowd for a Japanese wrestling crowd in my experience.
So pardon me as I look at my notes. Here, usually I have them on a separate screen because I'm on my home on my computer, but I'm at a guest, so I have to bring it on my phone.
I also now know why John and Wei sit across from each other as opposed to this weird angle that we're
doing. So like we should try to look at the camera as much as possible to all the listeners and people watching on the YouTube. But we're gonna talk about the NWA International Junior Heavyweight title. This is a title brought over by Chavo Guerrero Sr., Hector's brother. And both of these guys are the older brothers of the legendary Eddie Guerrero. And so he brought this title over. Bob basically kept this title though, because this is the title that would be used when it becomes the PWF Junior Heavyweight title in the 90s and into the 2000s. So Chavo Sr., Onita feuded over this title. Onita eventually got the belt. Hector worked 2 tours in All Japan. So we're going to talk about his match with Hector Guerrero, not Chavo Sr. Maybe we'll do one of those in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. He did 2 tours in All Japan in 1983 and in 84. He primarily worked singles and tags with both Harley Race and Gypsy Joe in 83, which is kind of interesting. I kind of try to look for those matches.
Because Gypsy Joe would also come back and wrestle a lot in early FMW, right?
Yeah. So it's the connection there, right? So in 84, I saw him wrestle primarily with his brother, Chavo Sr., especially in the Real World Junior Tag League of that year. So he had, I think he had fun. He looked like he got over. We talk about that in this match. He got over with this crowd.
Yeah,
this All Japan crowd. Okay, so I want to talk about let's get into the card, and I want to talk about the other matches that were on this card. So our opener was a singles match between Yoshihiro Momota, who defeated a young Toshiaki Kawada in 9 minutes and 5 seconds. Nobuyoshi Sugawara defeats Masaji Goto in 9 minutes 32. Tag team match: Great Kojika and Motoshi Okuma defeat Rocky Hara and Shiro Koshinaka 11:44. A lot of these are familiar names, right? Yeah, Koshinaka, Kawada, Kojika. Kojika create Big Japan Pro Wrestling.
So like a future, like a lot of like, I guess it's like before the changing of the guard would happen, but this is when all these young people are kind of first stepping in.
And it's interesting to see like a lot of people who started with Baba in the 70s and 80s would be pioneers of deathmatch wrestling in Japan. If I'm Onita with MMW and Kojika with Big Japan Pro Wrestling.
Yeah, it's weird how that works too, like that, because it feels like deathmatch wrestling, at least in Onita's case, was really born out of necessity.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how, I don't know, where they both kind of come from the same place.
It is interesting. Yeah. I think maybe Kojika was inspired by the success of Onita. Yeah. Maybe. I don't know that for a fact, but I have to assume that might be the case. Another tag team match, Mighty Inoue and Takashi Ishikawa defeated Mitsuharu Misawa and Ultra 7. I have to know more about this Ultra 7. That's a brand of cigarettes over there. So I don't know if that was a sponsorship deal or not.
That'd be amazing if you come to the ring smoking. It's like doing the Sandman thing.
It just like Onita too. It just like maybe pointing at the camera. Ultra 7. Anyways, singles match. Asahara Hara defeated Gypsy Joe by disqualification, 11 minutes, 12 seconds. Genichiro Tenryu went to a time limit draw with Jumbo Tsuruta.
Whoa.
30-minute time limit draw between those two. Got to find that match.
Yeah, that would be a good match.
The match we're going to talk about, Onita versus Hector Guerrero. And then for the PWF heavyweight title, Giant Baba, the champion of the time, took on Harley Race to a double countout, of course, in 11 minutes, 24 seconds. You don't get clean finishes between Baba and Harley Race, who's going to be protected by the NWA. And finally, our main event was a World Tag Team League match. Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen defeated the Funk Brothers, Dory Jr. and Terry Funk, by countout in 13 minutes and 55 seconds. So again, the era where no one's going to do a job to each other. And so it's booked like this. But if this was the 90s, there would have been a decisive winner. Bob would have said, put his foot down, said, one of you's going to lose. It's hard to say who he would pick because Hansen was his man, but he loved the Funk Brothers. He loved both those guys.
Yeah, I kind of think, though, in that situation, it would be the Funk Brothers losing. I think they would be more amenable to losing than I can see.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is, like, we'll talk about this. Like, I'll talk about this on a future episode of like this show with when I do my Stan Hansen biography episode. But you know, Hansen was trained by the Funk Brothers, so he has a really good relationship with those guys. So he'd be like, "Oh yeah, we'll put it over Stan. We like him."
Yeah, and I think that, and I feel like Terry Funk, like that's another person. Like hearing him on Colt Cabana's podcast, kind of breaking down the difference between Japanese wrestling and American wrestling. You know, he just seems to have such a really good understanding of what's good for wrestling. And that's what he always seems like he's doing, is like, is this good for wrestling at the end of the day?
Oh yeah, true professional. Almost everyone in this match. Bruiser Brody,
maybe
rest in peace. Love Bruiser Brody, but you know, more interested in his own business rather than the greater good of the business. But Stan Hansen, I think Stan has ultimately he's going to put over the business, but the Funk Brothers, consummate professionals.
Yes, absolutely.
So for sure. So let's get into this match. It's between Onita and Hector Guerrero for the NWA International Junior Heavyweight title, and I'm gonna kind of go through this. It's not, just so people know, it's not a long match. We're gonna talk more about history of like Onita, because like I got this guy. He's got to talk. I gotta use him as the great resource that he is about this subject. But Hector's already in the ring. He's wearing this beautiful, by the way, like gold outfit, this ring jacket, the gold tights, and the black boots. I thought, this guy looks like a star. In gold. If you wear gold, you better carry it off. And I think Hector carried off really well.
I think everything about him, like where even the way he's like right off the bat, he just feels like on another level of presentation. Like this is not going to be just some pushover type person too. He looks like the whole family. Obviously, he's coming from like a wrestling dynasty. There's a story where Conan talks about where he would go into his to Gory's house, and there'd be a giant photo of Gory doing a push-up and all the suns on his back.
Oh my God, that's
as he's doing this push-up, and it's just like, this is wrestling royalty.
Oh yeah, it's like we talk about the Samoan dynasty. You know, you have like the Von Erichs and the Hart family, but you also have to talk about the Guerreros.
The Guerreros, absolutely,
one of the biggest dynasties in wrestling. Onita comes out. Hector's already in the ring. Onita comes out, not to Wild Thing, because it's pre Wild Thing entrance theme. It's to this really like funky disco theme, which I really liked.
I've got a bunch of All Japan records, and I do like the kind of like funkier theme musics on there too. You know, the soundtrack albums you can get when you're in Japan, and they're all like, you know, they're pretty cheap when you're over there. That's like one of the more affordable things I buy when I'm over there.
I bought 2 copies of Terry Funk's Japanese records.
He sings on them though, right?
He sings on them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I gave one to Mike Murray, who may or may not be giving it to Dan the Muffler Ramsky in the future. I don't know. He might just keep that for himself. One's for me. I kept one for myself because I'm like, one of these days I'm gonna actually, you know, break out, get a new record player and play this, listen to it.
I can help you out with some records when you got a record player.
Okay,
I've got some extras.
Well, there you go. Wow, it's trip to this house is turning out even better than I thought it would be. But Onita's in his trademark blue tights. Onita written on the ass of his tights.
I think that's not this one.
That's it. Yep. Without
the undershirt.
Without the tank top. It doesn't have the Onita written on his ass.
Yeah, no, this one doesn't. There's a new toy coming out though, which has the actual true Onita original costume with the Onita on the ass.
There you go. He also has this great ring jacket, blue and white, satin, wonderful. I love ring jackets from the 70s and 80s. So let's see. Onita is sporting a bandage on his forehead. So he was already a bleeder back in the 80s. Even just in an Ultimate, he was like bleeding all the time. Before the bell even rings, it's great. There's a lot of heat. Guerrero and Onita just engage in a slap fight with one another because Guerrero's like, "That's my brother's belt. That's my family's belt. I'm taking it back to America." And they just start slapping each other.
Oh, it was awesome.
Great start to this match. Before the match even starts, let's continue. So let's get into the match. Onita hits a shoulder block off the ropes. Guerrero gets up and leapfrogs over Ness. He also flips out of an Onita backdrop. From here, they go back and forth, trading the advantage with one another. So it's actually, you know, like a really good high flying match already, especially from Hector. He's doing a lot of the flips and flying stuff already at the start of this match, just trying to get advantage over Onita.
And a good size differential too, for like, he's a little bit bigger than Onita, and so it has that kind of you know, fighting from underneath feel to it.
Yeah, Guerrero gets the advantage with an armbar that he turns into a hammerlock. Onita tries to escape with a headlock and flip, but Hector maintains wrist control, a big theme in today's wrestling, wrist control. If I never hear that term again, it'll be too soon. I hate that term.
Everything old is new again.
That's right. Wrist control, important in the 80s and important to one Kazuchika Okada these days. Guerrero tosses Onita to the outside and follows up with attacking his arm some more, slamming it onto a table on the outside. Very basic kind of like, you know, American style brawling match. Now it turns into, and it's going to devolve even further. Well, devolve or evolve, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, like I love the fact that it does go outside and there is tables right away, which I guess, I don't know, was that as common in All Japan? I guess now it's so much
brawling.
Yeah,
like, you know, like, because it is a promotion that is like based around the style of the Funk Brothers, because they trained Jumbo. They were super tight with Baba. They helped in a lot of ways. They helped found All Japan, right? So they were the first real big foreigners to come over and become stars in Japan. Like I always say, like if you were to ask 9 people on the streets of Japan who a famous wrestler that they're aware of as, 9 times out of 10 they're gonna say Stan Hansen, but I'd say 7 times out of 10 they might say Terry Funk.
Yeah, as a non-Japanese wrestler, they'd say, because like I know, Baba is the person they
Baba and Inoki.
Inoki, absolutely too.
Yeah, but if you are asking about a foreign wrestler, who's a famous foreign wrestler that wrestled a lot in Japan? Stan Hansen. Then it's Terry Funk. It's not Ken Chan. Okay, like very few people would know who he is. It's just sorry to burst some of your dreams out there. Anyways, so Hector basically owns Onita in this match and is clearly a superior wrestler to him. I don't think that's a far cry to say. Like Onita, very decent, like wrestler, technical wrestler, but not a great wrestler. Hector's pretty good.
Yeah, Onita, I feel like at every step of the way, he does the best with what he's got. And he's like he always makes the most of what he's got. And whatever that skill is. And that's, post injury when he does FMW, like that's where he invents a whole new style to kind of compensate for what he can't do anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. He's definitely getting eaten alive.
We'll talk about because something happens at the end of this post match that I'm just like, really? Maybe this is the start of the end for his junior heavyweight career. Onita gains a momentary advantage with some chops to the midsection, but Guerrero ducks out of a shoulder block in the corner, and Onita eats the steel post on the outside instead. Hector applies the Cobra twist, but Onita gets to the ropes. Hector continues his assault, but Onita finally reverses the fortunes with a giant Baba-style neckbreaker clothesline. You can see this is like where, that's very much inspired by his mentor, Giant Baba there. So not something he keeps in his FMW career, I don't believe.
No, well, I guess he would adapt to his opponents, but it's definitely not like a staple.
Onita starts doing some high flying moves. He goes for a top rope missile dropkick. Looks great. He hits a tilt-to-whirl backbreaker, and then he goes for a top rope headbutt. But Guerrero gets out of the way, so there's no water in the pool, as they say. Hector goes after the forehead with closed fist. He hip tosses Onita and follows up with a nice head scissors takedown, and then another. This kind of reminds me of like a Lenny Poffo jobber match in the WWF back in the 80s.
Yeah.
There's a drop kick that sends Onita back out of the ring, and then Hector flies over the top rope with a nice looking early style tope con hilo and knocks Onita down. Hector back inside the ring, and Onita is able to hit a flying sunset flip and gets a close 2 count. Good move, good looking flying move from Onita there. Onita hits a big boot to the face that sends Hector to the outside, and then hits a regular tope to press his advantage. Hector versus a suplex attempt back into the ring and gets a 2 count. Onita is able to hit a German suplex and gets the 1, 2, 3 in 9 minutes and 54 seconds. It's a very short match, less than 10 minutes, which, hey, I'm not going to complain about. Once in a while, you got to talk about the short matches. But I thought...
And a kick out kind of at almost like 2 and 3/4.
Kick out.
Yeah.
Scott Hall style.
Yeah, exactly.
Kick out of 3. It's how you protect yourself in the business, as they say. But very short match.
Yep.
And Onita gets the win, but I gotta assume like Baba okayed the kick out of 3.
Yeah.
Whatever. You know, so, but it doesn't end there, Damian.
No. This is where it gets the Onita theater.
This is where it actually becomes more interesting, is the post match. So Hector is disputing the finish and gets into a post match brawl with Onita, where Onita hits him with a steel chair to the head, and Hector, actually, you can see him do this.
Yeah.
He blades himself, and he blades himself with a gusher because he is bleeding really badly in this at this point now.
This is actually where I learned about blading, was from All Japan. And I'm trying to remember what match it was, but I worked with a video store at the time with this guy, Glenn Salter, who had an incredible collection. He was friends with Mouth and had an incredible collection of videos, like wrestling tapes. And he would bring in stuff and we just watch it in the video store. And I remember watching, I think it was, I'm trying to remember what it was, but maybe the Road Warriors or something. And there's blood. And I'm like, how do they do that? And he's like, oh, it's a blade. And I'm like, what? And he's like, oh, it's a little bit of razor blade. To take aspirins, I use a little razor blade. I'm like, oh. And prior to that, I've been hitting myself in the head with the microphone. I still have some scarring from it. And then after that, I realized, oh, you just have to use a razor blade. And that's when I started blading on stage.
Tape it.
Yeah.
Ric Flair talks about it. He tape it thin razor blade like that. First time I ever learned about blading, Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy, WrestleMania 2 cage match.
Oh,
you can see the Bobby the Brain Heenan do the blade on Bundy outside of the ring.
He cut him for him.
Yeah, he cut him for him. So that's how I learned about. What's he doing? That's weird. Oh, now Bundy's bleeding. Oh, I get it. The business was exposed by Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Well, that's one of those things that even when you get it exposed and you tell most people how they do it, they're like even more grossed out than finding if they were actually busted open the
right
way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
they're
it's
cutting themselves.
Yeah, there you go. So from here, where am I? They continue fighting, and the crowd starts. This is the best part. The crowd starts chanting Guerrero. Guerrero's not Onita's name, and are firmly behind him as he hits Onita with the championship belt and busts Onita open as well. Now Onita's bleeding like Gusher, and I have my notes for like this, Damien. It's like this would have been better in the body of the match.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was wondering because I'm trying to. This was before he went to America, right, and got injured because he got injured and then he came back. And when he came back with the injury, I'm trying to remember if he had the title then, because that's when eventually he's told by Bob, like, you don't got it, you got to retire. And that's when he goes into early retirement. I was like, is this after that point and he can just not go?
No, because he retires in, like, I'm gonna say a couple years later, 86 or 87.
Okay. So it is way before that.
This is still a point where he's still wrestling. He does the excursion in Memphis, right?
Yeah.
Before this, and he comes back, and then he does another excursion, I guess.
And he does it the second excursion. After that's when he gets injured. Then.
Yeah. Okay. If there's anyone listening who has
Bahu.
Yeah. fact check this in the comments on the YouTube video or the post wrestling forums. This I think it's hilarious. Actually, I think it's hilarious. Guerrero's more over in this match than Onita. They have a much more interesting post-match brawl where they're bleeding. I just think that was hilarious. The best part, though, this is my favorite part, because the best part is when Onita, it's all done. Guerrero's going back to the dressing room. Onita's on the apron. He's like signaling, "I'm actually the one. I won this brawl too, along with the match." He jumps off the apron onto the ground, and then he collapses because his knees.
This is when he gets the injury. This is the injury, because that's what it was. He was leaving the ring and busted out his knees, and that's what it was. It wasn't even in a match when he got his injury. So this must be the match.
Yeah. So wow. And then it's so bad. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not saying it's funny, but like, and historically, it's fine. He has a great career. Honestly, stemming from this, his career is just, he makes so much money.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see what would have happened if he hadn't been injured.
Yeah,
and he just, like, I wanted to ask you about this because you know better than me, and had continued on in All Japan. Like you're saying, this opens the door to him becoming the director of the movie and creating this whole company around himself. Whereas if he had stayed at All Japan, as you're saying, he's getting eaten alive. He's not necessarily the best wrestler. Like, would he have had? Like, would we be talking about him?
No, like, so, I mean, like, I just want to quit my final point about the match itself. No, that's right. We're going to talk about that. Is that it's so bad. They have to carry him on one of the mats outside. All the wrestlers have to carry him to the back, like carrying him on this. That's how bad his knees got. But to your question, Damon, like, I don't think he would have stayed because his ambitions were so great. As you know, in hindsight, it's like, this man has a massive ego. Would he have been happy being just a junior heavyweight wrestler in a company that wasn't known for junior heavyweight wrestling? No. He would have left. And like, with his limitations, I think he would have gone the brawl, the hardcore wrestling, the deathmatch style type of wrestling. Because I think he was inspired by his excursions in America, particularly in the Memphis territory. Because that's, he did that. He saw a lot of that. He participated in some of it.
Well, and also
in Puerto Rico,
because Victor Quiones, who he meets down there, he brings over for FMW, and I think and obviously he's in ECW too. He's like the guy who I don't think ever gets the credit for being the blood dude, that goes around kind of, you know, teaching or bringing this style.
For those who don't know, if you ever watched WWF in the night, in like when Great Sasuke and Taka come in and Kaientai DX, Victor Quiones is kind of part of that. He's like one of the most important behind the scenes guys in wrestling for Japan, Puerto Rico, and like this trifecta of the Puerto Rico territory, the Japanese territory, and for the WWF, because he was really tight with Vince, I think, wasn't he?
I think so. And I think that's that's what I love about this. The wrestling is this sort of cross-pollination of styles where you have, you know, obviously this sort of like American thing, go to Japan, become something completely different than the influence of these guys going to America, picking up on where it's at in America, bringing it to Japan, it going somewhere completely different, and then inspiring all this stuff in America in its wake. Like, I think it's this sort of energy that just gets kind of passed around in wrestling. And because of that, it just constantly changes and becomes something new. And maybe it's different now because we're all exposed to the same thing all the time. But for watching it kind of happen, when you look back at the history, it's so incredible to see unfold.
So you talk about cross-pollination because it's interesting who eventually joins Onita over in FMW, with the main person being, I think, like Tarzan Goto. I think Tarzan Goto started in All Japan too, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to FMW. He wrestled a lot in FMW against Onita. But also, like, later on, Samson Fuyuki, who was in the tag team Footloose with Kawada, and they were both part of Genichiro Tenryu's Revolution stable. And then, Tenryu forms War, forms SWS and War, and Fuyuki goes with him because he's Tenryu's boy. But when War basically shuts down, Fuyuki goes to FMW, and he brings with him two junior heavyweights that he's the mentor to, Jado and Geto.
Yeah.
So they start wrestling in FMW a lot in the later part of FMW. I remember reading them because I was in Japan in the early 2000s, and I was reading the magazines. I was like, "Wow, what's this? What's this team? No Respect." Great faction name, by the way. Hey, if we ever in Japan together, we go to Todokan together, we have to find matching Team No Respect shirts. Okay, yes. That's the goal, folks. Team No Respect.
I think the thing I miss most about being in Japan, honestly, everything I miss most about being in Japan, but
size area,
every like food, just everything, like just like But I miss Todokan. I miss going to that store and just being like, it's like a museum, right? So you can just kind of look around and feel like you're taking it all in. But I got like ring jackets there. I bought. There's just so much stuff I wish I had bought that I didn't buy. There was this Noah white, like full length winter jacket, but it was autographed. So I'm like, I don't know, and I couldn't find out by who. But I'm like, I don't know if I want to wear someone's autograph around.
Right. I would wear someone's autograph was on a Ribera, but like
I wear that.
I saw they had a Ribera steakhouse jacket there for sale. It was like
no
$3,000 US.
Yeah.
I was like, no.
It's one of those things that like buying it would feel so. It'd be like buying your Twitter verification check mark.
It'd be great if there's like someone who I knew who's a wrestler who went to Japan and already has a Ribera steakhouse jacket and got a second one and then just gifted it to me.
Yeah.
That's just I'm just thinking out loud here. That's all.
When we were filming The Wrestlers, we went there with Kota Ibushi, and like before we get there, I'm like, "Have you gotten a Ribera jacket?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Oh my god, they're probably going to give you one," because we called ahead and been like, we want to film, and they've given us permission. They're like, who are you filming with? And we kind of told them. Well, I'm like, they're going to give you the fucking jacket, and he's like, "You think?" And I'm like, "Yeah, dude. Like, why wouldn't they?"
Yeah.
And so we're there, we're eating, and then we're just like all waiting at the end. And I'm like looking at him, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, like
you didn't ask?
No, we didn't ask, but they didn't offer either. I'm like, I don't know how this works. Like,
I don't think they give them to Japanese wrestlers.
I don't think they give them to Japanese wrestlers. That's what I thought.
I've never seen a Japanese wrestler wearing a Ribera steakhouse.
That's
jacket.
what I was wondering. Like, is it just something they only give it to the Gaijin wrestlers that come in?
Only the we should say Gaikokujin.
Oh, that's right. I mean,
it's okay.
Sorry, yeah,
it's okay. We're correcting white people. It's part of my job.
I need to catch up
on this series. Gaikokujin.
Gaijin
means is kind of a pejorative.
Okay,
we shouldn't say that. Gaikokujin means foreign person.
Okay, but I could see why Gaijin was then used for wrestlers referring to other wrestlers. Maybe then.
Yeah, they like most wrestlers back then. They don't know.
Not a lot of love lost.
No, they don't know shit about like, oh, what does this mean? Who cares? We're just gonna say it.
Well, I think Terry Funk put it best in that Cole Cabana episode where he's like, in America, we were trying to make a work look like a shoot. In Japan, you're trying to make a shoot look like a work. Like there was no love lost between that first generation of wrestlers.
No, they like beating the shit out of each other. Excuse me. So let's talk about Atsushi Onita. You had the chance to meet him. When you interviewed him, maybe on screen or off screen, did he talk about Jambaba at all?
We talked a little bit about it because we talked about like the way the interview kind of came together. We were told like, okay, you're going to have him for this amount of time. If he likes you, he'll ask you to meet up again. So the first time we went in, and once again, all credit to Bahu for kind of having this sort of resource for me. But I was ready to go in. I'd watched a lot of Onita, and I wanted to talk to him about his history. And I just went in. We talked about the history of it. I bought this at Todokan, which is the promo from the first FMW show.
Let's get it closer.
I got him to sign it on there with a pen, and he was just. But yeah, we talked about Baba, and he talked about how there was like sort of this like real like, what am I going to do with my life moment. It seems like like you're saying, he had this sort of oversized ambition, but it was also, and it's hard to separate the legend from the reality with all people in entertainment.
I think he would have looked at people like Fujinami in New Japan and like Fujinami went from being, the premier junior heavyweight of New Japan at the time to graduating to heavyweight status and becoming, like him and Ricky Choshi basically, were the guys in the late 80s for that company. They were the guys who headlined everything. They were the two biggest stars. They were the perennial like IWGP heavyweight champions. I'm sure he looked at Fujinami and thought, I'm going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be like Fujinami. I'm going to become Triple Crown champion or the PWF champion, and then later the Triple Crown champion. I'm going to be the same level as Jumbo and Tenryu. But Baba probably was not going to let that happen. With him, and though he was like, his knees give out probably in this match, as we're talking about, and then he retires for like about 7 years.
I think he takes years off, and I think he's even working as a janitor at one point. Like he had a bunch of failed real estate investments, and he kind of went through a spiral, and that's according to him too. Like there was a real depression, and he came back to it out of desperation, and he went to, I think it was like the Karate Federation, and once again, I'm probably mixing up the actual name of the organization, but he goes there and issues a challenge, and out of this goes to a karate competition and doesn't do any of the karate, just shoots on the guy and shoots for takedowns and starts choosing pro wrestling moves, which eventually led to them doing that first frontier martial arts wrestling thing. And it was out of this sort of like need. It's interesting though when you think about him. Kota Ibushi's this way too, where like you talk to these guys and they're like, I had to do this, Takeshita too. Like they're like, I emailed the head of the company, or I wrote a letter, or I called up the head of the company and I was like, I need to do this. And then they get brought in as a young boy and trained, but it felt like all these people were kind of like, I had to do it. You talk to Onita and it's like his mom, he was supporting his mom at the time. And he turned to wrestling to kind of make it happen. And it wasn't like, well, I'm going to do wrestling because I like wrestling, or I'm going to do wrestling and I hope I succeed in it. It's like, no, I'm going to do wrestling and I'm going to make good on it because I have to. And there's no other way for me to do things.
It's been said like he was really like really loyal to Baba when he started off. He was really diligent in the dojo from my reading of it. And like when he was like one of Baba's ring boys, like, taking his robe, taking it back to the ring, to the locker room, things like that. So he was really like loyal to Baba up to that point. But like when his injuries come out, his career seemingly is over. Baba has not any use for him. But it's like basically you can't wrestle. Like I can't use you. I don't know if he offered him a job in the office or anything. Who knows? I don't know. But he becomes like the guy who starts FMW, the guy who pioneers modern, like you're saying, modern wrestling in general, with these because FMW is the clear influence on ECW, but like deathmatch wrestling, this genre that has basically become its own type of wrestling in the sense like I if you only watch deathmatch wrestling and you never watched any traditional wrestling, but you still consider yourself a wrestling fan, like I would say, okay, like that's its own form of it. It's like saying, like you have mainstream films and then you have like different art house films. That's like deathmatch wrestling is like kind of a version of art house cinema for wrestling.
It's like death metal music or like gore grind music. Like Onita said, he's like, there's country music, there's rock music. He's like, we were the punk metal of wrestling. And I think now where it's evolved, like with Freedoms and Big Japan and all this sort of and stuff that's going on in America and GCW, it's now like power violence and gore grind, and it's a lot more kind of a lot of the tethering it to older traditional wrestling is kind of being stripped away as time goes on. Mind you, then it's all come back around. Like now it's on TV with AEW. It's wild to see people that like. I would be like, I remember talking to Chris Jericho on tour one time because our bands toured together on a festival in Australia and being like, you ever watch any of that deathmatch wrestling? And just him being like, no. And then I would hear he's doing deathmatch.
He's doing death matches.
He did bleed though. He was bleeding in Smoky Mountain. So
he must have bled in
war.
Yeah.
There's that once. Have you seen that Smoky Mountain match where he like it's just sheets, the referee's covered in blood. It's him and what's his I can't believe I'm blanking.
Tony Anthony?
No, the other Canadian guy.
Lance
Storm. And then Jericho just hits a gusher. He said he was on painkillers because he had hurt his leg the day before, and it's just sheets of blood. So he wasn't above bleeding.
Talking about cross-pollination again, we also you think about people that came under Onita's tutelage in FMW. The two prominent names would be, one is Hayabusa, and the other would be Masato Tanaka. And Hayabusa did a short stint for Baba in a tag team with one Jinsei Shinzaki. These are great matches.
Unbelievable matches.
I'm actually going to talk about. I've talked about one of their tag matches on the first episode of this series, but I'm going to talk about it. Actually, next month's episode is going to be talking about a Hayabusa Jinsei Shinzaki match picked by Alan Cunahan, actually, aka L&WRR. I shouldn't really say this because we haven't recorded it yet. I just was in email with Alan, and we're just picking out the schedule for that. So, that's tentatively next episode.
That's podcast curse. So I'm fingers crossed that we don't have.
We should be okay. Should be okay. But those, so Hayabusa did work briefly for a little bit for All Japan Pro Wrestling. I would have, if he jumped, I don't want to get FMW fanboys mad at me, but if he jumped, it would have been fucking awesome.
Yeah, I think the thing is,
I think Baba would have pushed him.
Yeah, I think he could have. He was one of those guys that I think if he had been in a different, he was carrying that company for a long time, FMW, and if he had been somewhere else where he didn't necessarily have to carry the company, and he could have just been like a guy on the roster and kind of become the star. I think, he could have. There's photos of him and Vince. I think he could have been a crossover star. He had such a cool look and such a cool style.
Well, Vince still has look for Al Snow, right? Avatar.
Yeah, Avatar. That's right.
So Vince was definitely a fan of the Hayabusa there. The other thing with Masato Tanaka I want to talk about is this guy. In between the demise of FMW and the start of 01, he does a brief stint in the post-Exodus All Japan with but for whatever reason, he doesn't get picked up by them. They don't offer him a contract, but then Shinya Hashimoto says, hey, come work for me. You and Otani are going to be my guys underneath me. And then he's basically been part of 01
ever
for since. the last 22 years. So All Japan's lost. When he started, okay, this post-Exodus, what are they going to do? There you go.
Tanaka.
There, Masato Tanaka. Is he wearing his shorts or his long boys?
Long boys, right?
No, those are his fire shorts.
The fire shorts.
His Dangan shorts. The long boys are kind of
with a 3/4 length pant.
No, they were kind of like when Onita wore football style pants before the jeans.
Okay.
There's a time where Onita wore that. So Masato Tanaka kind of had a similar look.
Okay.
But yeah, Masato Tanaka in All Japan, I was build the company around this guy.
Oh, he's
him and Kawada building around him, but no, they didn't get him.
Some of those, him versus Mike Awesome on that ECW DVD, I think Barbed Wire, I've got it up there, but seeing that for the first time was just what is this? This does not look like anything I had seen before. Just how, and some of their matches I'll just watch on YouTube just over, just being I can't believe how good these two guys were and how and neither one of them ever felt like they hit that potential they could have hit.
Well, Mike Awesome also short stint in All Japan in 99 before the Exodus, before he basically goes to ECW. He's doing some All Japan dates with having singles with there's a singles with Kobashi and other people, and he would have been. I think Baba would have pushed, or Masao at the time was a booker. He would have pushed him as the next Stan Hansen in the company. So it wasn't meant to be, folks, and
one of the best big men of all time, I think.
Interestingly enough, I agree with you. But compared to guys in WCW when he went there, he was not that big.
Yeah,
but one of the best high flyers. Yes. Surprisingly, in wrestling was the Gladiator, Mike Awesome. But any final thoughts or comments you want to make about Onita in this period or in general?
I think Onita is definitely someone who, as you're saying, he might not be the best technical wrestler of all time, and certainly in All Japan there are some of the greatest technical wrestlers of all time, but the fact that he's another person that came out of this system that went on to do something completely different in wrestling just shows how foundational this is for where wrestling went in every way.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that, All Japan in its history was a breeding ground for people to branch off into other promotions, and including Pro Wrestling Noah, FMW, Big Japan Pro Wrestling, more than New Japan. New Japan, a lot of guys just stayed in New Japan for the most part. Like, the big offshoot of New Japan would be like, two of them would be like UWFI, with the shoot style with like Akira Maeda forming, doing his own thing there. And then later on, Shinya Hashimoto with 0-1, which is like its own, the creation of 0-1 is its own funny story, because it was meant to be like, oh, we're gonna create our own offshoot promotion that we're gonna use as for an invasion angle, and then it became its own promotion. Legit, that's Japanese wrestling for you, folks, by the way.
And we use their dojo. That's a lot of the stuff we shot with. Stardom at the time was using their dojo, so all the stuff we shot with Stardom was there, and it was so awesome to kind of like look around and see all the 0-1 barbed wire kind of tucked behind the ring and all this sort of rusty deathmatch shit that was also just lying around.
There you go, folks. He's been in the 0-1 dojo.
I was very lucky. That's my thing. About that wrestling show, I feel like I wanted that show just to be like, this is my fantasy of what a year in wrestling traveling the world would be like. And then they made it. And then just to get to live that every day was just surreal.
Can I say my favorite, like the Stardom episode?
Yeah.
And the Latin American episode? I love those episodes.
I think, but like when we were in, thank you for that. But like when we're in like, we're doing the one in Nunavik up in way north of Quebec. And we're there, and then all of a sudden Kaito Kiyomiya is there, and we're like, what the hell are you doing here? And he's like, I'm on excursion. And no one speaks Japanese. His English got a lot better, I think, over the course of that trip, but he did not have a lot of English, certainly spoken English, conversational English. And he's like, yeah, they just shipped me over here.
Yeah.
And now I'm in the middle.
Now he's, well, he was supposed to be one of the biggest stars in wrestling, but hey, Keiji Muto took care of not making that happen. I love Keiji Muto, but let's be realistic. Anyways, Damian, thank you for having me over. Great episode, live remote episode here in Chateau de Fucked Up. I was gonna make this joke just as behind when I knocked on your door. If you answered the door, your lovely wife answered the door. But if you answered it, I was like, "Hi, I'm looking for the house of Alex Lifeson of Rush." Is this it?
I told you my story where I met him one time.
Did you? No.
Yeah, we got asked to open for the Foo Fighters, and the Doughboys were opening too. The Foo Fighters asked the Doughboys to get back together and do a read. When the Foo Fighters ask a band to get back together, they do apparently. And so we're there, and I'm watching the Foo Fighters on the side of the stage, and the singer of the Doughboys, John Castor, comes up and he goes, "Damian, I'd like to introduce you to someone." And I'm like, turn around, and it's Bubbles from the Trailer Park Boys.
Okay.
I'm not a big Trailer Park Boys fan, but I'm like, oh shit, the Trailer Park Boys, dude. And then I'm like, hey, to his buddy. And I walk away, and I'm standing on the other side of the stage, and I'm like, that's fucking Alex Lifeson. He's just hanging out with Bubbles from Trailer Park.
For those of you who don't know, Alex Lifeson is the legendary guitarist of Rush, one of the greatest Canadian bands of all time.
One of the greatest Canadian bands of all time. And as soon as I got across the stage and got a distance from him, I realized who it was. But yeah, I used to smoke weed with Geddy Lee's son. So because he was friends with a friend of mine. So there are some Rush connections.
There you go. I'm 6 degrees of Geddy Lee.
6 degrees.
Holy fuck. That's amazing. See, if you met Geddy Lee in the wild, you would totally recognize him.
I would definitely. Oh my God.
So,
if I heard his voice from across the room, I'd recognize it.
Yeah.
Have you heard that song by Pavement where they're like, the lyric is like, I wonder if Geddy Lee's voice is actually that high. And then one of the other members of the band goes, yeah, I met him one time. His voice is really that high.
It is that high. If you ever see him in interviews, great synth player, besides being a great,
everyone in that band. And they were like, when they first started, like that first album's fucking awesome. Like the hard rock record.
Yeah.
But they would play with like Teenage Head, and they were like really kind of like the hard rock scene in Toronto would eventually become the metal stuff and the progressive stuff and then the punk stuff. But they were all kind of together, mixing it up, playing together.
We're getting music lesson about the Toronto music scene on top of like 80s Atsushi Onita in all of Japan later on to FMW. What a fucking show.
When Onita said, FMW is the punk rock of wrestling, my heart exploded. Like that was the greatest moment of my life.
So before we go, Damian, I want to thank all the listeners this year for their support. We had some awesome guests, as you said before, Tom Lawler. We had Eddie Kingston on this year. We had like just so many great guests, like JP and JP Land. John Pollock finally got on this show.
He's never come on Turn Out a Punk. He promised me every year, and it's 8 years in.
I have his phone number. That's why.
Okay, well, you won't let me have that.
So it's easy for me to get him to coerce him to come on.
I used to text him and Way together, right? There's like this group text, and then I'm listening to the podcast. Like I sent him like a really sweet message after the WWE Saudi Arabia show where they were on air. Like, I wonder if people like so responded. So I sent him a text being like, "Yo, guys, I just want you to know I thought that episode was really great that you guys did and really thoughtful, you know." And then Way writes back like, "Thanks, Damian." Below, nothing from John. I'm listening to the fucking post. And John's like, I hate the group text chat I'm in with Damian. Like what the dude? What?
John has never said anything bad about me private messaging him. So maybe that's it tells you everything you need to know. But one thing I want to talk about, we got to plug Damian. Like if I had the foresight to remember to wear it, I would have worn the new Long and Winding Railroad t-shirt that's gonna be on sale. By the time you listen to this, Way has promised me it's gonna have dropped by the time you watch this or listen to this. So hey, go buy it. It's designed by my friend Josh Rosen. It's got the 5 pillars. We decided to add Jun Akiyama to the images. And hey, it's on sale. Store.postwrestling.com. Go get it. It's a great late Christmas gift. I don't think it'll arrive before Christmas, but if you want to get it for a New Year's gift for somebody, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Like our Orthodox holidays are right afterwards.
You know, some famous people might be wearing this shirt out in the wild. Who knows?
Buy
you
it
can be
now.
like them, cool like them.
Buy it now or see it on TV later.
TV later. Like, well, we'll talk about it. I'll tell you about that in private. Anyways, I can't talk about it on air.
Oh, I haven't told. Yeah, we didn't. I didn't get to tell my story about the former guest hosts on this show wanting to beat up our camera guy advice.
Hello. There you go. All right, but yeah, you know, we're gonna wrap it up here. Next year, 2023 is gonna be a big year. Another big year for the show. We're gonna have a lot more cool guests, talk a lot more cool matches. Alan Goodhand, hopefully, is gonna kick things off. Alan Farrell, in January, we shall see. Hopefully, you know, cross our fingers. But until then, thank you very much, Damian. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time,